Welcome to the tutorial video for Activity 1. Now what you're looking at here on the screen is the instructions that we went through before that are on the PowerPoint presentation, but we'll very quickly just recap them so that we're clear on what we need to have in front of us in order to complete this activity, and also the procedure with which we're going to go through this activity right now in this tutorial video. So the first thing that you need to do is to open the Microsoft Word document that is in the Lesson 2 folder called Representation Analysis Table. That is the document in which the activity is going to be completed, and the document in which I'm going to now model or show to you how to complete this activity. So you're watching the tutorial video now. Once we've gone through the tutorial video, you then need to go and complete the activity in that Microsoft Word document. You will then edit your work as you ordinarily would do, save it as your name, and then email it to me. Okay, so that's the instructions. That's the order in which, or the procedure with which we're now going to go through the activity. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so here is the Microsoft Word document that you'll complete the activity in. Alright, so let's go through what it is that you see here on the page. Okay, so you can see that we've got a table set up here, and that most of the table currently is not filled out except for this left-hand column. So in this left-hand column, what we have is a selection of quotes from different chapters in the text in Wonder. And what we're going to do is we're going to use those quotes to analyze the representation of a theme. Okay, so we have the quote there. We're going to use that particular quote that we've got on the left-hand side to analyze the representation of a theme and the use of language features to create that representation. So this is the order in which we'll do the activity. So we'll read the quote. Okay, we'll then think about that quote using these questions here. Okay, so you can see in each of the columns there are different questions, okay, that will guide your thinking. And then we'll write our ideas in the table underneath it. So we've got the quote on the left-hand side. Okay, in this second column here, we have this question, which is asking us what are the themes and character experiences that the text is representing in this quote. So essentially what we need to do there is to identify what the theme or character experience that is being represented in that quote is. So we need to identify a theme or a character experience. In this column here, this is the question that will guide our thinking. So what language choices shape the representation of that theme that we identified in that column in that quote? Okay, so we need to very carefully analyze the different language features, okay, and the language choices that are made in that quote and how they shape a representation. Now in this final column, okay, this is the question that's going to guide our thinking. This is where we bring it all together. So, based upon the theme that we've identified, based upon the language features and language choices that we've identified in the quote, what is the representation of the theme or character experience in that quote? Okay, and that is really our analysis. Okay, we need to come up with an original idea or an original analysis about what we think the representation of the theme is through the use of the language features. Alright, so let's do two of these together. So we're going to do this one and this one together, and then you will do the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one on your own, and that's what you will send to me via email once you've finished it. Okay, so here's our first quote, and this quote comes from part 2, which is narrated by Vere, and it is from the chapter called An Apparition, at the Door. Now, if we were using our comprehension strategies, we'd already be thinking about what this term means, apparition, because it is a word that a lot of us might be unfamiliar with, and we probably need to think about that word in context in order to understand it. But an apparition is like a vision, or how else can I describe it? A ghost, or something that someone sees all of a sudden. That is the best way I can describe it. Okay, so let's have a look at our quote, and then we will think about our questions in relation to that quote. Once I got up in the middle of the night because I was thirsty, and I saw Mum. And I've said here SIC, spelt incorrectly, because that's the American spelling. Okay, let's not get confused about that. This is an American book. In Australia, we don't spell Mum that way. Standing outside Augie's room, her hand was on the doorknob, her forehead leaning on the door, which was ajar. She wasn't going in his room or stepping out, just standing right outside the door as he slept. I wonder how many nights she stood outside his door, and I wonder if she's ever stood outside my door like that. Now, when I read that little quote from page 99, and I'd suggest you go back in your book and have a look at it again as well, okay, so you can see it in its full context. But what are the themes and character experience that the text is representing in this quote? And when I read that, it is written from Vere's perspective, and she's really talking about her mum's experience taking care of Augie, and she's really representing to the audience sort of the care and love and thought that her mum puts into caring and thinking about August. So she's just sitting outside his room, listening to him breathing as he slept, okay, making sure that he's okay, tending to him. So the character experience that she's representing there is, or one of them, is being the parent of a child with high social and emotional needs. And then what really stands out to me here as well is just here she says, and I wonder if she's ever stood outside my door like that. So she's reflecting upon her own experience there and her own relationship with her parents and her mother, and what it is like to be the child, what it's like to be the brother or sister of a child with high social and emotional needs. It takes a lot of your parents' attention. So another theme or experience that's being represented in that quote is family life with a sibling or child who is different. Okay, so when I read that, I really think that is the two character experiences and themes that is really being reflected upon and represented in that little quote there. So the experience of her mum having to be a parent to a child who has such high social and emotional needs, and a child who is extremely vulnerable, and also a child who has been through so much. So we're sort of getting an insight there into just how much Sophia's mum sort of cares for Augie and wants to try and protect him. So it's really shaping the representation of that experience and what that is like. But also, down here, that sort of slight sense of jealousy and that slight, I suppose, retelling of the experience of what it's like to be neglected as a sibling of a child with high needs, and what that experience is like, having to always take a back seat to the needs of a sibling. Okay, so we've identified two themes or character experiences that this quote here is shaping a representation of. We now need to think about this quote in relation to this question. So what language choices shape the representation of the theme in the quote? Okay, so what are the really key words or language choices here that really create the representation? Now I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to identify the language features or language choices that I think are really, really important. So once I got up in the middle of the night because I was thirsty, and I saw Mum standing outside Augie's room. Her hand was on the doorknob, her forehead leaning on the door, which was ajar. She wasn't going in his room or stepping out, just standing right outside the door as he slept. I wonder how many nights she stood outside his door. And I wonder if she's ever stood outside my door like that. So I think this here is really, really critical. This part here. So she says, I wonder how many nights she stood outside his door. So she thinks about that. How many times has she done this? It's the middle of the night. She's just standing there outside August's door, just listening to him while he sleeps. And then she says, and I wonder, it's repetition, isn't it? I wonder if she's ever stood outside my door like that. So, repetition of the term I wonder, here and here, and outside his door and outside my door. So the narrator, Via, is creating a contrast between the way that her mother cares for and thinks about August, and the way that she cares for and thinks about Via. And it really is creating that contrast, or what's called a juxtaposition, which is like a comparison between two things. In this case, the comparison between how her mother cares for August and the way that she cares for Via. So that is a really critical language choice in shaping the representation of what it is, or what family life is like. If you have a sibling or child who is different, or who is high needs. Alright, so let's copy that in to this column here. And alright, let's summarize here what we think the representation of that theme is. So, first of all, in regards to this character experience or theme, I think the representation is that it is extremely worrying and stressful being the parent. Child, high social and emotional needs. Okay, so that is what I think the representation of this character experience is. Okay, so it's the experience of Via's mum, and the representation is being shaped by Via as the narrator. So the representation, my analysis of it is that, her mother is extremely worried and stressed about Augie's well-being all the time. So much so that she is continuously focused on him, and even, stands outside his room at night just to make sure that he's okay and that he's, sleeping well. And, it requires of love and emotional investment, love, care, attention, and emotional investment. Alright, now in relation to the representation of this other theme or character experience, and that is what it's like to live in a family or be a brother or sister or sibling to a child who's extremely different and who has those high social and emotional needs. And based upon the use of that language choice and that juxtaposition or comparison that is being made here, is that it is extremely difficult for Via sometimes. And, she feels neglected by her parents. And, she feels as though she's not treated with the same love and care and attention and emotional investment from her parents. They're not receiving the same attention and care from their parents. And we can see that in that quote. So Via, as a narrator, is representing what it's like to be in a family where you have a child with high social and emotional needs. And that experience can lead to feelings of neglect for those other siblings because they're not receiving the same attention and care from their parents. All right, so we've done our analysis of the first quote. We've identified two themes or character experiences that the quote represents. We've also identified the language choices that have been made that help shape that representation. And then we've summarized our analysis of the representation of that theme. Okay, we're going to now do one more together, and then you're going to do the last three on your own. Okay, so our second quote here is from part 3, and this part of the novel is narrated by Summer, and this quote is from a chapter entitled The Plague, and it is also from page 120. So I'd suggest before we go any further that you go back and read that page in its full context, and then you can see that quote or the context in which that quote comes from. So pause the video and go ahead and do that. And I'd suggest that you do that for the rest of the quotes when you're working on your own as well. Okay, so let's read it, and then we'll identify some themes or character experiences that are being represented in the quote. One of the things I'm not loving about this year is how a lot of the kids are acting like they're too grown up to play things anymore. All they want to do is hang out and talk at recess. August doesn't bother about that stuff. He likes to play Foursquare at recess, which I love to play too. So this is Summer discussing how her social circumstances in year 5 are changing and how the kids are growing up around her and she feels a little bit left behind. So my analysis of that quote is that there is a representation of the theme of growing up and being... Actually, no, we won't put that in just yet. Let's just leave it as that. So, growing up. Alright, so what are the key language choices that, or what language choices shape the representation of the theme in the quote? I'm going to highlight here some of the language choices that I think are critical. And I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to highlight them. So one of the things I'm not loving about this year is how a lot of the kids are acting like they're too grown up to play things anymore. All they want to do is hang out and talk at recess. August doesn't bother about that stuff. He likes to play Foursquare at recess, which I love to play too. So a couple of words that I'm going to highlight here that I think are important are these ones here: things and stuff. Alright, then I'm going to write them in. Now, why I think those words are important is because when I read this, Summer has chosen words here that are childlike, aren't they? So things and stuff. You know, they're words that younger children use. They're not sophisticated vocabulary. And what that tells me is that Summer is okay with being a kid. She doesn't really want to grow up just yet. She still wants to play Foursquare at recess. She wants to play her game. She doesn't want to grow up and be like the other kids who just hang out and talk at recess. Okay? She wants to hang on to her childhood. So she's growing up, okay, and she feels a little bit left behind, and she still wants to be, a child and do the things that young children do, including playing, including, using words like this and speaking in a childlike way. So my analysis of the representation of the theme is that when one is growing up, other people and peers can leave you behind. And that can cause you to feel isolated. Actually, we'll change you to 1. I'll use second person. Cause one to feel isolated. Okay, so my representation, or what I think the representation of the theme in that passage is, that growing up, when other people grow up quicker than you, or your peers grow up more quickly than you do, that can cause you to feel like you're being left behind. And especially if you want to hang on to your childhood and you don't want to grow up too quickly. And because of that, a lot of her other peers and friends, are leaving her behind, and she's choosing to hang out with August, who still likes to, play those games and do the things that she likes to do as well as a child. All right, so we've done 2 of them together. Now, like I've just shown you, okay, I want you to read the next 3 quotes. Make sure you're reading them in their full context in your novel. Then think about the quote in relation to these questions. So what is the theme? What are the language choices that are shaping the representation of the theme? And then overall summarize what you think the representation of that theme or character experience is. Alright, so that's where we'll leave our video tutorial. make sure once you've completed the table you edit it, and then send it through to my email address so that I can check that it's done. Alright,